I'm a 25-year-old woman, and my ex-fiancé, who is 27, and I were together for 6 years, and we're planning to get married in December. Around 4 months ago, I started a new job as a nurse and began hanging out with a group of 6 other nurses. It felt great to have friends outside of my ex's social circle. We would talk about all kinds of things, and one topic that intrigued us was the swinger lifestyle. It seemed exciting at the time, hearing about their weekend adventures, and them asking about things I wanted to try or do. After about 3 months of listening to their stories and discussions, one of them suggested that I could fulfill 2 things from my list at once. She said I wasn't married yet and could take a break from my relationship, do what I felt I needed to do, and then go right back to my relationship without any harm done. Looking back now, I have no clue what I was thinking. In August, I had planned a trip to California to visit my parents. I told my fiancé that I needed some time alone to clear my thoughts. I lied and said I would be back in 3 weeks, even though I had actually planned to spend 2 weeks with my parents and 1 week partying with my work friends. Now let's talk about that 1 week. When I returned, I went out to a club and had dinner with a couple. We had a great time dancing and having fun. Later at their house, things got more interesting between me and the wife. Exploring my curiosity, I ended up going down on her. And then, to my surprise, her husband joined in abruptly and ripped me. I immediately stopped everything and ended up needing 4 stitches. I was in a lot of pain and had bruises. I stayed at their house for a few more days until I recovered because I was too ashamed to face my fiancé in that condition. On the night this all happened, my fiancé called me, but I didn't answer until the next day. I lied again, telling him I was still at my parents' place and that I would see him on Sunday. When I returned to our apartment on Sunday, all of his clothes and personal belongings were gone. There was a note saying, "I hope he was worth it," along with his apartment key. I panicked because I had no plan for this situation. I called and texted him, but all he sent me was a video of me dancing with my friend's husband, and then he blocked me. At this point, I was frantic. I called my friend and told her what happened. She came over with 2 other friends to calm me down and assured me that everything would be fine, saying, "Sweetie, all he has to do is come back and claim you." Later that week, he gives me a call. I ask him to come over on Friday so we can have a conversation and I can explain everything. He agrees, and I even get his favorite takeout, imagining a scenario where he would reclaim me and we would live happily ever after. But when he arrives, he brings his mom and brother along and starts gathering the rest of his belongings. I'm a complete wreck, crying uncontrollably. His mom tries to calm me down on the balcony while they finish packing. Then he comes out to the balcony, sits down and says, "Okay, you had something you wanted to say." He listens, but he doesn't engage in the conversation. He only responds with short, one-word answers or shrugs. It's the coldest I've ever seen him. I pour my heart out, desperately pleading with him to stay with me for the weekend so I can prove my love for him. Unfortunately, he declines, says goodbye, kisses my forehead, and leaves. I spent the whole weekend crying and desperately trying to contact him. When I returned to work on Monday, I looked absolutely terrible. Once again, my friend came up with a plan. So on Tuesday, she and I waited in the parking lot of his workplace, hoping to have a 3-way with him, thinking that would make him want me back. My mind was completely focused on the idea of him reclaiming me. But he flat out turned us down. He remained calm and composed, and he asked me to stop calling his family in order to reach him. Once again, he made it clear that we were done, and that I could do whatever I wanted now. He said I should be happy to be free of him, but the truth was I was miserable and desperate for any solution. The following day at work, another friend suggested using Reddit as a source of information and support to deal with the situation. At this point, I started distancing myself from my friends and began reading on Reddit about giving him some time to process things before trying to talk to him again. So, to avoid the others, I changed my shifts at work and started keeping to myself more. I even asked my former friends to leave my ex alone. Last Thursday, the husband of one of my friends went to my ex's workplace to talk to him, but things escalated, and my ex ended up kicking the guy's knee after he shoved him. The next morning, which happened to be my birthday, I woke up feeling down and hoping my ex would reach out to me, but no such luck. Around lunchtime, I went downtown to grab a bite to eat, and that's when I saw my ex wearing a smile. having lunch with a blonde woman I had never seen before. In that moment, everything I had put him through hit me all at once. I finally realized the extent of the damage I'd caused him. It crushed me to think that he was just having lunch with someone else, and my stomach twisted in knots. I left before he could see me, went back home, quit my job, packed up whatever I could fit in my car, a Navigator, and started driving back home to California. Luckily, my brother convinced me to detour to his house in Texas instead. That's where I am right now. Second story. Let me give you some background about me. I'm a 34-year-old guy who grew up with a single mom after my dad passed away when I was young. Luckily, I had older brothers who were positive male role models for me. My dad had a life insurance policy, so I had a decent upbringing. However, I was never really social and spent a lot of time on my computer since my teenage years. This habit got worse during college, and I ended up spending about 80% of my time in front of a screen. As a result, I wasn't physically attractive and became overweight by the time I was 20. Due to these factors, I didn't have much dating experience and didn't even have closeness until I met my ex-fiancé. Also, I grew up in a religious environment because my mom became deeply religious after my dad's death. So I never felt it was a good idea to date around. The only positive aspect of my life was that I had some coding skills that I developed during college. I wasn't an expert, but with creativity, coding could generate passive income. Luckily, I had a decent job in IT that allowed me to work from home 3 days a week. At the age of 24, I was still overweight and felt like a social outcast. However, I met a woman through my mom's Bible study who would later become my ex-fiancé. We hit it off and started dating. She had a 2-year-old son at the time, and they became the most important part of my life. I let go of the idea of saving myself and became more sociable with her help. Within a few months, I took on a fatherly role for her son, and within 6 months of dating, she became pregnant. Being religious, I proposed immediately and wanted to get married before the baby was born. Then, she revealed a shocking truth to me. She was still legally married to a man who was in prison. Surprisingly, this didn't bother me too much because she had always talked about her troubled past, and I believed I could be the one to rescue her from it. So I accepted it as part of the package deal. She initiated the divorce process shortly after, and we made plans to get married once it was finalized. I felt like everything was going great after the birth of our baby, and I believed I had found my place in the world. I even started losing weight and spent less time online than before. She had always been kind to me, and I thought we shared everything with each other. But boy, was I mistaken. I was so infatuated that I missed some clear warning signs. Here are a few examples. 1. She mentioned early on that the only reason she got involved with my church was because she was on probation and had pending court cases. She thought it would improve her situation. 2. Despite me earning a comfortable 6-figure income from my main IT job and side projects, she insisted on keeping her part-time job. As a result, my mom had to help me take care of the kids. 3. She seemed to know an unusually large number of people. I mean, what regular suburban mom with a secretarial job has around 200 contacts in her phone? 4. We kept postponing our marriage due to various reasons like sick relatives or other issues, even though she did go ahead with the divorce from the guy in prison. Then something happened that snapped me out of her influence. She became pregnant again, but this time with twins. We had only been together for 4 years, and now we were going to have a total of 4 kids. 2 more than I ever imagined having. She claimed she was on birth control at the time, so we didn't use any additional protection. After the twins were born, I started discussing a vasectomy with my doctor, and my ex-fiancé actually supported the idea. However, I wanted to freeze some material before the procedure, just in case we changed our minds within the next 5 years. So I went to see the doctor, and he informed me that my material count was low and that most of them were not moving properly. He suggested that it might be a temporary issue and advised me to improve my diet and make healthier lifestyle choices for a few weeks before returning for another evaluation. During my second appointment, doctor tells me that it's likely I'm infertile, though it turns out that wasn't entirely true, as I now have a child who I know is biologically mine, But that's a different story. I mentioned that I already had 3 biological children, and the doctor seemed concerned and started explaining something, but I was in such shock that I didn't fully grasp what he was saying. I think I left the doctor's office before they even finished with me. Instead of getting into my car, I just started walking until it got dark, and eventually I called an Uber to take me home. My fiancé was worried and already asleep when I arrived, so I made up a lie and told her that my car broke down, my phone died, and I was at the mechanic late and forgot to let her know. I woke up the next day and immediately went on the computer to look for similar stories, desperately hoping to find some false hope. The first post I came across was about how fertility assessments can be inaccurate, so I was convinced I should definitely get another test. I thought for sure this test would prove the doctor wrong, but when I received the test results, back within a week, it became clear that the kids were not biologically mine. The first person I confided in was my mom. I went to her house and cried, something I hadn't done since becoming an adult. She comforted me, but then she shared a story with me that I was never meant to know. It turns out I myself am the result of an affair, and my dad actually died from a drug overdose after finding out. I don't know why on earth my mom thought this would make me feel better, but in reality, it just distorted my perception of women for a while. After telling me the story and once I had calmed down, she insisted that I man up and fulfill my commitment to these kids because I was the only father they had ever known. Until that point, I had always been a pushover, and her words stayed with me for about 24 hours before I completely reached my breaking point. I called my fiancé and explained that I had to spend the night at my mom's place due to a family matter. She offered to make us dinner, but I declined. By this point, the twins were around 6 months old, and the boys were 2.5 years and 5 years old. I won't pretend that I felt absolutely nothing for these kids, but it was incredibly difficult for me to look them in the eyes because I knew I was no longer their father. I was aware that this would deeply hurt and harm them, but hearing them say "Dada" to me felt like a sharp knife piercing my heart every time. Despite my inner turmoil, I remained composed and didn't reveal my true feelings, and my mom also stayed silent, probably thinking that I was manning up. I sought legal advice because I wanted to remove myself from the birth certificates of these children, hoping that I could smoothly extract myself from this situation since we weren't married. Unfortunately, after going through the legal and financial process, it became clear that I would bear a significant responsibility since our finances were intertwined, and I had taken on a fatherly role. This meant that I would be responsible for child support, particularly for the boys, and she would receive equity in the house and a share of my side businesses. Essentially, the lawyers informed me that I would likely have to pay around 25% of my income for many years to come. I wasn't happy with this arrangement, so I pretty much cut ties with my lawyers after paying their initial fee. I didn't want the state to enforce this financial burden on me. This is where my revenge plan started to take shape. I devised a plan to disappear and leave them with as little as possible. The first step was to destroy all of my passive income streams and intentionally get myself fired from my job. Getting fired turned out to be relatively easy, although it was a bit cringeworthy. I did things reminiscent of the movie Office Space, like smashing an office printer in the courtyard. While working from home, I didn't do much except send memes to my coworkers. I made sure not to harm any clients since my boss was actually a friend of mine. However, my office mates found it amusing to witness these antics. After losing my job, I didn't even bother filing for unemployment and started relying on our savings to sustain myself. Despite both of our names being on everything, my ex-fiancé allowed me to handle all the financial matters. She didn't notice that our accounts were slowly draining and that our financial situation was spiraling into chaos, mainly because I left a few $1,000s in her checking account, although our credit card debt skyrocketed because I stopped making payments. For months, I sat there contemplating whether I should end it all and follow in the footsteps of my would-be father. But in the end, I decided against it. In an attempt to find out the true biological father of the kids, and hoping to separate them from my ex, I got ancestry test kits for them. However, the results turned out to be even stranger. It turned out that the oldest child was actually a cousin, or half-sibling to their siblings, indicating that the brother of the guy in prison must have fathered her. Additionally, the test didn't show any family members that I thought would be a good fit, so that investigation came to an end. I also made an effort to distance myself from my mom because I was disgusted by her actions towards my dad and her newfound alliance with my cheating ex. I devised a plan to escape, to get as far away as possible from everything by disappearing on a supposed hiking trip. I really built up this hiking trip, emphasizing that I would be alone with my thoughts on the trails in insert location here for a whole week. Before the trip, I took the 6-year-old out for ice cream and cried for the second time as an adult. It was obvious that the 6-year-old was upset to see his dad cry, and he tried to console me. I think I was crying because I had to leave him, and I apologized to him repeatedly, although I think he was just confused about the whole situation. My biggest concern was losing him. Even though I knew he wasn't biologically my child, I had still managed to form a bond with him. That afternoon, I left and actually made my way to the lodge where I checked in. Now, I'll skip over the details of what happened next because I'm not sure if it was legal or illegal. But let's fast forward to 6 months later. I had assumed a new identity and moved to a new city, where I was able to restart my IT career and gradually work towards regaining my previous income level. During this time, I began stalking my ex on Facebook and other social media platforms. I have to admit, it felt cathartic, to say the least. The chaos they experienced while trying to access accounts must have been quite difficult, and my ex discovered that our financial situation was not as comfortable as she had believed. Seeing her beg for money on Facebook was quite trashy. I won't go into the legal details, but many people were searching for me, and at one point, I considered contacting the police to let them know I was okay. However, I ultimately decided against it. Although I ended up having to pay a significant fine for this, it was well worth it. I focused on improving myself for a long time and got into great shape. I also let go of my religious beliefs and embraced a more indulgent lifestyle. I became unrecognizable, both physically and in terms of my personality. I continued stalking this woman for about a year until I heard she started dating a new guy and became pregnant almost immediately. Of course, my mom was still involved in their lives, taking care of my supposed children while I had no idea what she was up to. Then, on the 1-year anniversary of my departure, she created a memorial page for me. This made me realize that my revenge wasn't quite finished, so I decided to reach out to my brother and let him know that I was alive. Over the past 10 years, we had grown apart, but he was family and had always been there for me in the past. I explained my reasons for doing what I did, and we caught up on everything. I asked him to keep it a secret for now, and he agreed. However, he then shared with me that my mom and ex-fiancé were suing my insurance company to claim my life insurance. Somehow, my ex had managed to maintain the policy despite its high cost. If she won the case, the payout would be substantial in the 7 figures, and she would also receive the premiums she had paid since my alleged death. Well, I'm not the kind of person who would stoop to insurance fraud, so I began putting my plans into action. I embarked on a 1,000-mile journey back to my old city when I found out about my ex's upcoming hearing, blasting Highway to Hell for good measure during half of the drive. I arrived at the courthouse early and took a seat. By this time, I had grown a beard, lost 60 pounds, and overall looked quite different. I looked so unrecognizable that my fiancé and mother walked right past me without even giving me a second glance. Initially, I thought they would be meeting in a large courtroom, and I was already scheming to burst in, objecting dramatically, and acting like a cringeworthy character as usual. However, it turned out that they went into a small room with some lawyers from the insurance company. I thought, what the heck? And decided to knock on the door repeatedly until they opened it. They all seemed puzzled to see me, a scruffily dressed man with a beard, and I simply said, I believe you're trying to resolve the matter of whether I'm dead. My ex-fiancé immediately recognized me and let out a gasp or some sort of shocked reaction. The lawyers, on the other hand, were completely confused. Soon enough, everyone started pouring out of the room, and chaos ensued. The bailiffs were called over to handle the situation. My ex screamed and even slapped me, leading the bailiffs to put handcuffs on her to maintain control. It turned into quite a spectacle, and it seemed like a big deal for the insurance company. The lawyer's boss or client actually showed up and requested statements from everyone involved. Even a detective arrived at the scene, and at that point, I started to question whether coming here was a good idea. Nevertheless, I provided my statement, being careful not to lie about anything but remaining vague about my current whereabouts. I ended up staying in town for nearly a month, residing in a cheap motel. It was an eventful and crazy month. I shared evidence of my ex's infidelity with anyone who showed interest, and I attempted to meet with the kids. However, the youngest child didn't recognize me, and the 7-year-old at the time told me to go duck myself, which, considering the circumstances, was a fair response, I suppose. The police were furious and initiated a civil lawsuit to recover the costs they incurred while searching for me. A detective even flew in from another state to question me. Fortunately, throughout this whole ordeal, I managed to avoid getting arrested for anything because I didn't want my fingerprints tied to my new identity and such. Ultimately, I had to pay a substantial fine, which I promptly paid in cash, surprising the police. As far as I was concerned, I was finished with that town. My ex-fiancé served me with a civil lawsuit for various reasons, and my mom assisted her, but I had already moved on and was like a leaf in the wind by then. I returned to my new city and have no plans to go back. After a few months of sabotaging her insurance plans and spying on them, I eventually stopped and moved forward with my life. This all happened several years ago, and I'm in a much better place now. However, I'm feeling tired and need to get some sleep. If there's interest, I'll let you know what happened to me after all of this. Update. I won't discuss how to disappear since we can't talk about potential crimes here. But you can look up the case of Jack Barsky, a former KGB spy who managed to enter the U.S. and obtain credentials. Millions of undocumented immigrants do similar things to work for companies in the U.S. Uncle Sam just wants those taxes paid. I'm not well informed about the specifics of the insurance investigation and how they were searching for me, but I never received a phone call or any contact from them until we met face to face. I no longer have any desire to seek revenge because I now believe that violent delights have violent ends. In my view, my ex-fiancé's life is already difficult, and anything further I do would only harm the kids. After everything fell apart with my ex, I left the town and stopped reaching out to my brother. I even stopped keeping tabs on what was happening with my ex. Starting over in the world without family and friends is both lonely and frightening, but it's also filled with excitement and hope. So how did I start over in a new city? Well, I had a significant amount of cash that I used to stay in a motel for a few months while I sorted out all my documents and looked for work. Since I was afraid that my home computer would be searched once I disappeared, I couldn't plan everything in advance. I soon realized that finding a job with my skill set would be challenging without a college degree associated with my name. That's when I decided to create my own company and advertise my services in setting up custom dispatch software, video editing, presentations, and other tasks. I only managed to secure a few jobs through this approach, and it didn't even cover all my living expenses. However, after completing a few projects for the same company, I developed a friendship with a project manager, and they eventually hired me at a reasonable salary. To this day, my finances are only about 70% of what I used to make before, but I'm content with what I have. I spent a significant amount of time browsing the internet, connecting with people who shared similar stories, and eventually got involved with the Men Going Their Own Way, MGT Tau group. Unfortunately, our conversations mostly revolved around bashing women, and being part of that group fueled my resentment and misogyny. I even went as far as creating fake accounts to purposefully offend women online. I feel a bit ashamed and regretful about this now, so I'd rather not delve into more details. To compensate for what I felt I had missed out on, I joined Tinder and began engaging in casual, close encounters with women. I developed a habit of flaunting my money and deceiving them, which unfortunately became a way of life for me. I would cheat on almost every woman I was with because I believed they were doing the same. When I got caught, I would pretend not to understand why they were upset, leading them to either leave or attempt to forgive me, only for me to repeat the same behavior. I'm not proud of any of this either. A few years ago, one of the women I was regularly sleeping with informed me with excitement that she was pregnant. My immediate reaction was to accuse her of cheating and kick her out of my apartment. I could see the shock on her face as she left. You see, since I believed I was infertile, I just replaced her in my mind with another promiscuous woman. I continued to taunt her for a while, even sharing the details with my MGTO buddies and boasting about cheating on her openly. I provided her with evidence of my infidelity. Despite my behavior, I agreed to a paternity test while she was still pregnant, mainly because I wanted to avoid legal involvement. However, the test results shocked me. I cried and tried to embrace her, but she screamed, threw some papers at me, and declared that she never wanted to see me again. I returned home and drowned my sorrows in alcohol, feeling a mix of happiness for becoming a father, for real this time, and sadness over the person I had become. I want to emphasize that I don't want you to sympathize with me because I know I'm not a good person. Throughout the rest of the pregnancy, she refused to have any meaningful conversation with me, and I completely understood why. When the baby, a girl, was born, I went to the hospital to sign the birth certificate. At the same time, I had a meeting with her lawyer, who turned out to be her sister, to discuss child support matters that we had already discussed earlier. I decided to take a chance and made a desperate attempt by offering to sign any document they wanted if she would simply agree to have a 30-minute coffee chat with me so I could explain things. She was seeking full custody and significant financial support. I didn't hire a lawyer because my intention was to reconcile, and I felt that involving a lawyer would only complicate matters and potentially safeguard my own interests and finances. We met for coffee, and to my surprise, she allowed me to speak without interruption for nearly 20 minutes. I didn't fully disclose the whole truth about my past, but she did grasp why I wanted a paternity test. However, she didn't excuse my actions of mocking her, kicking her out, and being unfaithful. I signed the necessary papers, but I pleaded with her to let me have a relationship with my daughter and be involved in her life. She responded by saying that I appeared unstable and that I needed to undergo intensive therapy before any of that could happen. Naturally, I agreed to the therapy because I wanted to make things right. Therapy taught me a great deal, and I also conducted extensive research on the consequences of infidelity and related issues. It turns out there are numerous women who have been deeply hurt by cheaters and individuals who ruin relationships, and it was quite obvious that my perspective on women was incredibly toxic. Recognizing this, I made the decision to cut ties with my MGTOW friends because I believed that being in that environment would hinder my personal growth. I don't want to condemn the entire group because I believe there are some genuinely good people within it who are simply struggling and searching for answers. Having a baby girl was a powerful wake-up call that compelled me to change my behavior towards women and treat them with the respect they deserve. At last, when my daughter was 7 months old, I was granted supervised visits with her every other weekend. I fulfilled my responsibility of paying child support and made sincere efforts to communicate with her mother and seek reconciliation. Then one night, after a few drinks, things escalated between us, and we ended up kissing and becoming intimate. The following morning, she appeared embarrassed and asked me to leave, but there seemed to be a hint that she wanted to give our relationship another chance. It took a considerable amount of time, but eventually we decided to move in together when she lost her job due to the pandemic. However, her family strongly dislikes me, which has hindered any discussions about marriage or future plans. Damn, I actually skipped out on attending my own daughter's second birthday bash just because her lawyer sister didn't want me there. I hope things work out for me in the end, although I know I've been given more than I deserve. Due to the pandemic, I've been working from home while my girl takes care of our daughter and prepares meals for us. She's still wary of me and often checks in on me in my home office, but I don't mind. Right now, my focus is on being there for my daughter and trying my best to make things right with her mom. I'm still racking my brain for ways I can make amends, but for the time being, I'm continuing with my therapy sessions over Zoom and doing everything I can I don't think I can fully disclose everything to anyone, which is why I chose to open up to strangers on Reddit. I apologize to those who believed I was some kind of hero in my initial post.